Yesterday morning, a restaurant owner in Chennai locked his doors, not because business was bad, not because of taxes, not because of any reason you would normally expect a restaurant to shut down. He locked his doors because he had no gas left to cook. And here is the thing that makes this story extraordinary. The reason his gas cylinder ran out has nothing to do with India, nothing to do with his suppliers, nothing to do with his city. The reason his restaurant is closed today is because of a war being fought 4,000 kilometers away between Israel, the United States, and Iran. And if you think this only affects restaurant owners, you need to hear what is coming next. Because this war is about to touch every single household in India, every kitchen, every morning cup of chai, every liter of petrol in your tank. Let us tell you the full story, from the first bomb dropped to the empty gas cylinder sitting outside your door. To understand why a war in the Middle East is emptying gas cylinders across India, you first need to understand one small stretch of water. It is called the Strait of Hormuz. Picture a narrow bottleneck, barely 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point, sitting between Iran on one side and Oman on the other. It connects the Persian Gulf, where most of the world's oil is produced, to the rest of the world. Every single day, before this war started, approximately 20 million barrels of oil passed through this strait. That is roughly 20% of all the oil traded on Earth every day, flowing through a gap barely wider than a small city. Now here's what makes this relevant to you, specifically if you live in India. About 60% of India's liquefied petroleum gas, the LPG in your kitchen cylinder, is imported. And roughly 90% of those imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Which means that when that strait closes, and right now it is effectively closed, India's cooking gas supply does not just slow down. It stops. And that is exactly what happened on February 28, 2026. Let us go back to the beginning. For years, Israel and Iran had been fighting what experts call the shadow war, through proxies, through assassinations, through cyber attacks. Iran funded Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. Israel struck Iranian commanders, nuclear scientists, and weapon shipments. Neither side wanted to admit they were at war. Then in June 2025, that shadow war became very real. In the early hours of June 13, 2025, the Israeli Air Force launched 5 waves of airstrikes using more than 200 fighter jets, dropping over 330 munitions on roughly 100 targets inside Iran, including the Natanz nuclear facility. It was the most dramatic military strike in the Middle East in a generation. A ceasefire was announced on June 24th, bringing that 12-day war to an end. The world exhaled. People thought it was over. It was not over. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a new, far larger operation targeting Iranian military assets and the Islamic Republic's top leadership, killing Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Think about what that means for a moment. The leader of Iran, a man who had ruled the country for 35 years, the most powerful figure in the Islamic world, killed in an airstrike. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was quickly appointed to replace him. Iran did not collapse. Iran retaliated. Iran responded by launching missile and drone barrages toward Israel and attacking neighboring Gulf countries and partially closing the Strait of Hormuz, the world's major oil artery. And that is the moment India's crisis began. When Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, it did not make a big announcement. It did not send a formal notice to the world's shipping companies. It simply made the strait too dangerous to use. Iranian missiles and drones began targeting tankers. An attack on the tanker Skylight on March 1st killed 2 Indian crew members. Insurance companies, who calculate risk for a living, suspended coverage for any vessel attempting to pass through. Without insurance, no commercial shipping company in the world will risk sending a tanker through a war zone. The result was immediate and catastrophic. Hundreds of vessels were stranded. The Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20 million barrels of oil flowed daily before the war, was effectively shut down. For India, which imports about 90% of its crude oil and nearly half of its liquefied petroleum gas, the strait closure pushed oil prices above $100 a barrel almost immediately. Brent crude surged from roughly $73 a barrel on February 27th to $120 on March 9th, a 65% increase in less than 2 weeks. To put that in simple terms, the fuel that powers India's trucks, buses, factories, kitchens, and farms became 65% more expensive in 12 days. Now let us bring this home, literally. India is the world's second largest importer of LPG, consuming 31.3 million metric tons in the last financial year. It imports roughly 67% of its LPG requirements, with about 90% of those imports transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. When that supply chain broke, the first people to feel it were not oil companies or government ministers. They were restaurant owners, street food vendors, dhaba workers. 90% of restaurants in India rely on LPG cylinders to run their kitchens. The National Restaurant Association of India, representing over 500,000 restaurants, warned that closures and job losses were imminent. In Mumbai alone, commercial LPG refill delays ranged from 2 to 8 days. The NRAI stated that a prolonged shortage could cost the economy between 1,200 and 1,300 crore per day. In Tamil Nadu, nearly 10,000 establishments were on the verge of shutting down. The government moved fast. On March 10th, India invoked the Essential Commodities Act and established a 4-tier priority system, putting household LPG, CNG for transport, and piped gas at the top, while cutting supplies to industries and commercial users. In simple terms, your home gas cylinder gets priority. Your favorite restaurant does not. The government directed refiners to maximize LPG production, cut sales to industry, and urged LPG users to avoid panic buying and shift to piped natural gas where possible. But here is the deeper problem that nobody is talking about enough. About 50% of India's gas requirement comes as LNG, liquefied natural gas, and most of it comes from Qatar. Qatar lies beyond the Strait of Hormuz choke point. Currently, they are not able to send even a single cargo through. That means the crisis is not just about LPG cylinders for cooking. It is moving, slowly but surely, toward piped natural gas in cities, CNG for auto rickshaws and buses, and gas supply to fertilizer plants that produce the food India eats. Here is where India's story gets genuinely complicated. India has always maintained a very careful balancing act in the Fala, Middle East. It has strong ties with Israel, billions in defense deals, technology partnerships, agricultural cooperation. At the same time, India has a decades-long relationship with Iran, historical, cultural, and deeply economic. And India depends heavily on the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, for oil, gas, and remittances from the 9 million Indians working there. Now, all three of those relationships are simultaneously in crisis. India is urgently in talks with Iran as oil and LPG tankers remain stranded near the Strait of Hormuz. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar reached out to his Iranian counterpart, walking a careful diplomatic line, not condemning Iran's actions, not condemning Israel, but simply asking, "Please let our ships through." And remarkably, it partially worked. Iran's ambassador to India confirmed that Tehran had allowed some Indian vessels to pass the Strait of Hormuz in a rare exception to the blockade. 2 Indian-flagged tankers carrying LPG crossed the strait safely and were en route to India's west coast ports. This tells you something important about India's diplomatic standing in the world. Both sides of this conflict respect India enough to make exceptions for it. That is a result of decades of careful non-alignment. But 2 tankers are not enough. India needs hundreds. And the war is showing no signs of ending. Under Operation Sankalp, the Indian Navy has been placed on standby to provide escorts for merchant tankers carrying LPG and crude oil. The moment India sends warships into a live war zone to escort civilian tankers, the stakes of this conflict for India rise dramatically. The LPG crisis is the most visible and personal impact of this war on India. But it is just the beginning of the economic pressure building across the country. Surging oil prices and acute gas shortages are rippling through India's economy, with analysts already cutting growth forecasts and warning of rising inflation. Think about what higher oil prices mean in practice for an ordinary Indian family. Petrol and diesel prices rise, and in India, almost everything you buy travels by truck. So the price of vegetables, groceries, medicines, and manufactured goods all go up together. Domestic LPG prices were already raised by 60 per cylinder within days of the conflict beginning. The moment the crisis hits piped natural gas and CNG, the automobile sector gets affected. CNG forms the backbone of commercial mobility, auto rickshaws, taxis, city buses. If CNG supply breaks down, millions of daily wage workers who depend on public transport cannot get to work. Ceramics and building material units in Gujarat have already reported sharp reductions in gas availability, with some factories estimated to have fuel stocks for only a few days of operations. And then there are the fertilizer plants. India's farms run on fertilizer. Fertilizer plants run on gas. If the gas supply to fertilizer plants is cut and the government's own priority system puts fertilizer at Tier 2, below household needs, India's next agricultural season is at risk. A war 4,000 kilometers away, fought between 2 countries India has no conflict with, is threatening to raise your food prices, close your local restaurants, empty your gas cylinder, and slow the auto rickshaw you take to work. 3 scenarios for where this goes. Scenario 1. The war ends within weeks. A ceasefire is brokered. The strait reopens. Tankers resume sailing. Prices gradually fall back. India's LPG crisis eases within 4 to 6 weeks. This is the best case. Scenario 2. A prolonged stalemate. The war grinds on for months. Iran continues its strategy of using the strait closure as an economic weapon. India's government is forced to ration gas supplies more strictly and deploy the navy to escort tankers. Inflation rises, growth slows. Scenario 3. Wider regional escalation. The war spreads beyond Iran and Israel. If Saudi Arabian oil infrastructure is seriously damaged, the global oil shock becomes catastrophic. Prices could hit $150 or $200 a barrel. That would be the worst economic crisis India has faced since independence. The most likely outcome today is somewhere between Scenario 1 and Scenario 2. This is not a story about a distant war. This is a story about the gas cylinder in your kitchen, the price of petrol at your local pump, the restaurant in your neighborhood that may not be there next week. The Middle East is burning, and India is feeling every degree of that heat. If you want to understand how the world's crises reach into your everyday life, subscribe to the Global Brief. We explain it clearly, fairly, and every single day. Tomorrow, how India is navigating this crisis diplomatically, and what it reveals about India's growing power on the world stage.